Welcome to Beyond Consent, a deep dive into sexual assault awareness. I'm Kat.
I'm Ashley.
And today we're going to talk about public opinion. Hey, Ashley.
Hello.
So what have we got today?
Well, I want to touch on catcalling, the Google form that we had students and outside of the high school fill out, and then a few stories that people feel comfortable sharing.
Okay, let's get started.
So, overall question, how does the public affect what people are willing to share, and what is seen to be too sensitive of a conversation?
I think a lot of people don't come forward because of the way that it has been received by the public, especially with like the importance of the Me Too movement. We've seen a lot of people have stories that they don't share until they see, a majority of women come forward and say, look, this is what happened to me. And then, women were able to say, me too.
Yeah. When it comes to being too sensitive, I think it's to everyone their own, and I think that's part of the issue, is that nobody knows how the person's going to respond to the deep conversation that they bring up, whether it be, something in their personal lives, something especially with sexual assault and harassment, because I think this topic has been so shoved aside by students, by staff members, by people on like the internet, just everybody. I feel like people kind of took this topic and said this isn't appropriate to speak upon because who's gonna get triggered and who's gonna it's not. But then at the end of the day, it's you have these people who are being affected by these situations, and now they're worried they can't talk about what happened to them, and it's hard to think about in that sense.
Unfortunately, I think it is so extremely common. I would say less of the sexual assault as like an everyday, like day-to-day basis, but sexual harassment, because sexual harassment can be the littlest thing, which, in its own right, it's not little, but it can be the simple fact of a girl walking down the school hallway and someone comments on how her body looks.
Which, as much as people see it as funny and it's been turned into a joke, you have teenage boys running around the school yelling "yacht" when someone walks by.
It's not funny.
It's not. It is catcalling. It is sexual harassment.
It's normalized, which is the issue.
It has become in songs.
It's in songs. It's in social media trends.
You look at comments, and that's all people are saying. It's not better than saying someone has a fat ass.
No.
Because we all know that if you comment that someone had a fat ass,
you would get backlash.
Yes, you would get targeted by everybody.
The issue is people aren't talking about it. And I'm sure a lot of people aren't even doing it maliciously, and they're not saying, I'm going to do this because I feel like sexually harassing you. But at the end of the day, it's little things like this that are sexual harassment and that are normalized.
Which it could be as simple as a comment rather than in person.
Under no circumstance, PSA, under no circumstance should you say something to a woman from across the street. It's weird.
Yeah.
If you do not know that person, even if you do know that person, you should not be commenting on their body. You should not be calling them names. If you are a man or a woman walking across the street from somebody and you start calling them pet names or you start commenting on how they look, it's harassment.
Especially if you see the person isn't interested. It's bad enough as it is, and then when you see the person trying to walk away from you, trying to ignore the fact that you're speaking, and you continue, you're in the wrong.
Absolutely.
Simple as that. And as simple as it seems that, like, the word hot might be, maybe the same as cute. If you walked up to someone you didn't know and said, hey, I think you're really cute, rather than walking up to someone and saying, hey, you're really hot.
It's different.
It is so different. It's crazy.
And at the end of the day, people listening to this might be saying, it's a compliment, I'm doing it to be nice, like I'm just trying to be friendly. At the end of the day, it's not being friendly, and I think that's something that isn't talked about a lot, because let's say, for example, in New Jersey, if you go down to the boardwalk and you're walking down the boardwalk with a group of girls and a group of teenage boys comes up to you and they start talking to you like, hey, like you're really, really cute, like I want to get your number. If the girl says to you, oh yeah, no, sure, here's my number, great. But if they laugh and giggle, a majority of the time they're uncomfortable. Like, they
Yeah.
don't know what to do with themselves. So
if they walk away and ignore you, let them walk away.
Yeah.
Don't let them leave.
That's a big thing. Even if you're trying to be friendly,
A no is a no.
beyond consent, baby, a no is a no. No matter what situation you are in, no matter you're in a sexual context, you are walking down the street and you say, "Can I get your number?" and a girl says no. No means no. Walk away, end the conversation.
Consent 101. No means no. Yes means yes. If you have to fight her or him to say yes, it is a no. Like, there's so much you could say about this. It's crazy. When you hear someone say no, that does not mean you say, "Oh, please."
Oh God, please don't beg. Never beg. God,
Because
no,
then
never
you
beg.
put the other person in a position where they feel like they cannot say no.
Okay, so I am here with
MK.
and we are going to talk about some questions. Okay, so the first question that we're asking everybody is, why do you think more people don't come forward or openly talk about sexual assault and harassment?
I think it's just very taboo, and also I think there's a lot of loose definitions around it. So I think sometimes something can be classified as abuse, but not necessarily assault, or it might never cross that boundary of like rape.
Yeah.
And all the verbiage around it can get a little bit confusing, and it can deter people from saying like, "Oh, this happened to me," in case somebody says, "Actually, no, that's not what happened to you," and somebody else tries to tell them what their own experience was. So I think a lot of people just avoid saying anything altogether because they don't know exactly how to say it, and they don't want to maybe take away from somebody else's experience or cross any boundaries there.
So with that said, do you think it should be a more open conversation?
I definitely think so. I don't know if it's feasible to get it there though, because like I said, there's too many words around it that all means like slightly different things. And until we get to a point where like people aren't as, I mean, dare I say it, easily offended, you know, like, no, that's what happened to me. That couldn't have happened to you because your experience was different. You know, I don't know if we're going to be able to move past that. And it is a very individual thing. So I'm not sure how feasible it is, but it would be nice to be able to talk about it more. Yeah.
I think that's why, you know, something like the Me Too movement was a big deal and it was helpful to a lot of people, but it's also not necessarily something we want to try to prevent, but we don't want it to be a situation where, you know, you've gone for so many years with so many things happening behind the scenes that it becomes not necessarily a trend, but a big idea of, well, yeah, it's happened to a lot of women, and now a lot of women are like finally coming out and talking about what happened. Okay, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how do you think, in terms of just the conversation around it, sexual assault and harassment is dealt with in terms of relationships?
Oh, I think it's a completely taboo. Regardless of whether or not that relationship is dating, engagement, or marriage, I think that your partner, I mean, you're supposed to trust your partner, right? And if that partner breaks that amount of trust, you're not supposed to talk about it. You know, it's one thing to say, oh, you know, I was walking around in New York and this guy grabbed my ass or something like that. And that means one thing, you know, like that is sexual assault. It's this random man that you didn't know and he was on the street, you know. But it's another thing to say, oh, I think my partner sexually assaulted me, because that's a person that you were very intimate with. And there's a lot of blurrier lines there, because where did you draw the boundary? How did you communicate that? How much did your partner
say
know?
something?
Yeah. Did they do it intentionally, or was it just a mistake? And then do you want to blame them, or do you blame yourself? I think the lines get a lot blurrier there. And so I think that it just becomes one of those things where people don't talk about it because they don't know how to talk about it.
I think especially when it comes to terms of, you'll see movies or outdated, you know, books or TV shows where a husband and wife are in, you know, the 1950s classic abusive relationship, and yes, it was physical, but it was also a lot of sexual violence around those times. So you want to think, you know, we're now in 2024, things like that don't happen. There's, you know, consent and boundaries, and, you know, people are supposed to be brought up to know what's right and wrong, which is why we definitely thought a big thing is talking about, you know, what consent is within school systems, because a lot of times that conversation might not be as open at home. So how do you think consent should be addressed within school?
That's interesting. I don't know exactly, because I think it's a very difficult subject to cover. I think largely Livingston did a pretty good job of talking about it my freshman year. I mean, it sucks that we had to go through COVID, so not a lot of people remember their freshman year, myself included. But, you know, like, I think just like bringing it up and making it a conversation, and that whole idea of any yes that isn't an enthusiastic yes is a no, that's a really big deal, you know.
Especially the idea of being able to change your mind.
Being able to change your mind is a big deal. Yeah, and it's just it's very difficult to cover, but I think taking into account personal experience and making the topic personal, because it is personal, you know, it is very individual. I think that can help and bring a new color to it.
Do you have any questions for us or anything you would like us to ask other people?
I would just say, like, maybe if you are somebody who has been through an experience maybe with your partner or with somebody else, or if you are the person, you were the partner in that situation and you don't know exactly like what happened in that relationship, I would call for a little bit of self-reflection and, you know, just try to put yourself in the other person's shoes and try to, you know, like, have empathy above all else.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
People can change their minds.
Yes.
If you walk up to a person and you say, hey, you want to, I don't know, do whatever, and they say yes, and you are in the middle of doing something and they say, you know what, never mind, I'm uncomfortable, no, that's it, you stop.
Yeah.
There's no, you said it was fine, like, it's fine. And if God forbid something were to go further and your justification was they said yes, and it comes out that they said no before it went even further than where it was, you are in the wrong. That is sexual assault.
Yeah. It's such, I don't know. Because another thing is, as much as, like, we're talking about a lot of victims here, then you have the people who don't say no and then call it sexual assault. Which I've had a few instances of this, where the person, whether it was hooking up with a guy or something along the lines of that, and they were brutally uncomfortable. And they did not tell the other person, I can't do this. Let me go. Let me leave. And then, when at the end of the day, when they break up or they stop talking, they come up to me saying, well, he assaulted me. He raped me.
That's not fair.
That's not fair. You could be ruining a perfectly innocent person's life. Like, listen, I'm not trying to undermine any victims here because I understand. It's so hard. And at the end of the day, you have these people who are taking advantage of the fact that they are a woman and the fact that their partner was a male.
Unfortunately, a lot of, I'm going to say people, but women do take advantage of the system. And that is why a lot of women don't get listened to, because when the very few people that do come not few, but when the people that do come forward with true stories, they're gonna say, oh well, you know, this is not, you know, women support women. When you make it up, you are damaging the cause.
We are talking to Miss Picardo, the gender studies teacher.
Hi, Miss Picardo.
Okay, so starting off, our first question was, what do you see as the significance of a class like gender studies?
Well, I think gender studies is one of those topics that people think they know a lot about because it is something that we can all attest to or we've experienced, but there's a lot of then misconceptions that go unaddressed if you don't actually take a class like gender studies or really consider, like, having the time and space to consider how gender has impacted your own life and some of maybe the fallacies that you've come across that you don't even realize. So when we talk about body image and beauty standards, really considering the role of advertising and some of the ways in which that might be manipulating you and you don't even realize it. But I think a class like this allows you to recognize that. And it's not necessarily about stopping those influences, but it's about your ability to tune out what is not true.
No, I absolutely agree with you. Because we say all the time, too, even after we would have a lesson like this in class, we would then, like, turn around and make a comment, and you'd be like, we just talked about this. So why do you think a class like gender studies is the only place where conversations about things like sexual assault and harassment are had?
Well, that's a really touchy subject, right? And especially when you're talking about teenagers and peer pressure and just emotionally not maybe having a fully developed skill set of being able to talk about those things or feeling like it's socially acceptable to talk about those things. But also you're talking to other teenagers who are just as lost sometimes as you are. So having a class where you can explore that through the lens of actual, like, evidence and fact and personal experiences, as well as, like, with the resources of what to do and how to handle these things, becomes, I think, a lot more productive conversation, as opposed to potentially a scary conversation or a conversation in which you'd be judged. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for sure this class has been one of the only places I've seen throughout my time in high school where conversations like this are had without judgment or without the need to not downplay how people explain it, but if you were to bring up this, if you were reading a topic like this in a book and you were to bring up an experience, you get looks of, oh, you're making it about you, and this is not what this is about. So this was very much, I feel, a space that it was a conversation that was allowed to be had.
But also that there's such an underlying current of it in a high school hallway. Like every Monday, I am sure there's some level of these side rush conversations about something that happened at a party over the weekend.
Absolutely. Without a doubt.
And what happens when you just have A, people who continue to feel judged, or B, like it doesn't go addressed. We're talking about really damaging moments in your life, potentially, that if not addressed in a safe space, you could live with for the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, I think especially with stories, after we sent out this form and we got, 10, 11 stories from people that we go to high school with. Maybe even more at this point. We haven't checked it in a couple days, but it's just like, this is something that people that we know that this has happened to, and it's like a lot of the responses we got were, I've never talked about this before, or I've never had a place to mention this, so.
Yeah, and a lot of them, weren't willing to share their story in this, which fully understandable. They don't feel comfortable with it being publicized. However, a lot of those are like, this isn't something I felt comfortable telling people. They feel the need to hold back because of the fact that they don't know how others will respond.
Right. And also, a lot of times we talk about people dealing with these incidents after they've happened, but to your first question, if more people are taking gender studies and you have more awareness of what sexual assault actually is and what it looks like, not only can you intervene, but I would imagine that perpetrators of sexual assault might think twice, and instead of laughing it off and being like, that's just how we behave, or that's just party behavior, or I was drunk, really starting to understand the ramifications of your actions before they happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So someone sent in a story, and we feel like it relates to kind of what we're talking about right now, and they gave us permission to share. So the person that sent it in said, I was probably around 9 or 10 when I was on the gymnastics team. There was one coach who was new, and he would outwardly talk about other gymnasts to the other coaches. When he was on rotation with my team, we went on bars first. When I went, he said he was going to help me learn a new skill. He ended up grabbing my ass and boobs. I told another coach, and they said he was just spotting me when I knew that was not how you spot. I quit gymnastics a year later because I couldn't deal with being at the gym. So we were distraught by the fact that not only did this happen to this person, but then this person did go out to try and get help for what happened, and it was kind of shut down, turned down, because it's just, that's how you do it. That's what it is.
Which unfortunately is a lot more common. I think that's why a lot less people come forward, because the stories that they see are women that come out 5-10 years after they already tried to say something and they weren't heard. So that's why I think when we were talking about the Me Too movement in class, it was so important, because these women had tried to share their stories before, but now that it was not trendy, but it was catching on and more people were willing to listen, they said, this happened to me too. This was my experience, yada, yada, yada. I tried to say it 5 years ago. No one would listen to me then.
Yeah. And the coach that responded to this person saying, well, that's just how it's done, I think someone like that maybe rethinks that comment. Sure. If you're a little bit more aware to how common sexual harassment is and what it looks like and what forms it is and how damaging it is to people, it's not a thing that you just brush off.
No.
Or it doesn't become a thing that you brush off. So, again, back to why everyone should take gender studies. Having these conversations, I think, is the only way to really challenge some of the behaviors and norms that are so ingrained, we can't even process them as problematic.
Sure.
Because they've been told that it's normal.
Yeah. So do you think sexual harassment and assault should be a more open conversation in general, not even necessarily in a class like gender studies?
Yeah, that's why I think something like the Me Too movement is really encouraging. Or it's a really good example of how social media can be used, the positive benefits of social media, this ability to share your stories across time and place and space to really get people to start thinking about a thing that otherwise might just be like, it happened to one person, who cares? But when you start to realize how deeply ingrained it is society, I think that's when things changes. Like we talked about, all of the legislation that's passed in support of victims of sexual assault, or to prevent sexual assault, or to address it in a workplace.
Sure. Is there any questions you have that we could ask other teachers, we could ask other staff members, even students when we do student interviews?
I guess for students, I'd be interested in knowing like what other topics besides like maybe the ones that we've covered they'd be interested in learning about.
Sure.
And I'd be really curious to know why there might be a stigma for young men to take this class, or if there's a stigma against young men taking this class.
Well, thanks, Ms. Picardo.
My
I appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Everybody says believe the victim. And it's so hard because sometimes the victim is not an actual victim, and the hard thing about those situations is you never know what to do.
Yeah.
Because you don't know. At the end of the day, you don't know what happened in their bedroom or in that car. So you can't exactly say, he didn't harass you.
Yeah.
You can't tell them that,
It's a
because
very, very fine line.
it is. And it sucks that the people that do speak out on this and go to trial with these people, a lot of the time aren't getting the recognition that they need because of the fact that people are lying. You can't prove what happened to you unless there's the little things you can go through with, but very little do people feel comfortable doing that.
Well, this is why, and I know this is a hard decision, especially for people in these circumstances, but this is why rape kits are so incredibly important, and that a law was just passed that they are now kept
for longer
than a year, I believe. We'll have to double check that, and then we can talk about it in a different episode. But it is so incredibly important, especially if you're in a situation where something has happened to you. If you don't have access to that, unfortunately, it really does hurt your case.
The issue with these is they have to be collected within 24 hours.
Yeah, and you can't, take a shower.
Yeah.
You can't, which is really, really hard. A lot of people, especially when you're in that flight or fight mode, it happens and they want to go home and they want to get clean and they want to never think about it again.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the first thing when you are in that situation is, after calling the police or getting to somebody, is going to the hospital and getting a rape kit done.
Yeah. It's the last thing people think of, and it's hard when in that situation when you just want to grieve and you want to figure out what you're going to do with yourself after these situations, to say, hey, I have to go get a rape kit done.
Yeah.
That is the last thing on your mind, and it sucks, but it is so unbelievably important in the sense that if you did want to speak out, you now have proof.
Yeah. I also think it definitely needs to be an option, but it needs to be talked about, because there are plenty of people that don't even know what a rape kit is. They don't know that they exist, and they don't know that you can get a rape kit and you can get the person that did this to you. There's actually a story that I wanted to bring up now that you're talking about that. But...
Sure. There's just it's so hard, because also when you think about it, we don't know how many of these stories were men.
Yeah.
We don't know how many of the people that responded were men.
And we don't know, in terms of how people identify and things like that.
That too.
So I wanted to bring up a story that we have yet to talk about on here, but someone wrote in a story that happened with them and their significant other, and I think this is,
I think there's two we could actually talk about.
Okay.
The two long ones.
Yeah, so the first one I have, this is a story written by someone that submitted to our form. This was my boyfriend. He was my everything. I trusted him with my life and he made me so happy, but one day that everything to me clearly didn't mean anything to him. Hearing my voice crack and cry didn't change anything. I told him, stop. No, I don't like this. I cried. I felt helpless and weak. I thought he cared. Why would someone who cared do this to me? He broke his promise to where we would always ask first, because I wasn't sure if I was ready for sex yet, but clearly it was ruined. Well, if we were to dissect this story a little bit, first of all, consent. I mean, consent is written all over this. She said no. She said, I don't want this. She said stop. And unfortunately, as she says, this was her boyfriend. She thought he cared about her.
She thought she could trust him.
They clearly had this conversation before about when they were going to do this, and he threw it out the window, and from the sounds of the story, he raped her.
Yeah.
It's
As like hard to talk about as these topics are,
it's so
they need
important.
to be spoken on.
It's so important.
Because if we don't, or the next person doesn't, it just continues with this constant feeling of not being able to speak out, whether it be anonymously, whether it be you put your name in it, you go to court, or you're just talking to a friend. Like,
which I think it is important to note that although this survey was anonymous, Ashley and I both know like the demographic of people this went out to. This was a teenage girl. This was a girl our age who had a boyfriend just like we do, who had a conversation with that boyfriend just like we've had, and this is the situation she ended up in.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you are the girl that wrote this and you're listening, we are sorry
that you had to go through this.
And
to anybody that had a similar story, there are resources out there. There are anonymous crisis text lines. There are
people that can help you. There are people that want to help you.
And there are people that are there to listen, even if they aren't professionals. They aren't people in your school, therapists. There are, who else?
Talk to a friend.
Yeah.
I mean, even at the end of the day, if you pull them aside and you say, hey, you know, I need to have a conversation with you, it is so life-changing to have this out in the open, and it's such a weight lifted off your chest.
Yeah.
You're not alone. I want to say that. You are not alone. We have 7 public stories from people that filled out the form, and
people who sent in.
You're not alone.
We know, some people we don't. It's, and I think we're going to link the form in all the descriptions of these videos, so feel free. It's going to stay open. We're not going to close it.
No.
Feel free to go in and tell your story.
Fill out the form, answer the questions. If you want your story talked about, we can put it in an episode, because I think that's cathartic within itself, hearing others, you know, talk about something you went through and knowing that you're not alone.
And it's, like, we know people personally. We know of people. We've all seen cases about these things of people we don't know. Like, it's so common now that it's crazy to think about that people can't speak out like they want to.
Well, we are going to link the form in the description. We can link, you know, text lines and helplines, and by all means, leave a comment.
Yeah.
Feel free. We are here to talk about this. This is, you know, the point. We want this to be a conversation, and we want this to be open. Anything else?
I think you pretty much summed it up. Thank you for listening to the podcast. We're going to put the link for the forum in the description.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.